What's up, Fantasy Alarm Nation? I'm Justin Fensterman, and with me is James Grande, and you're watching the Fantasy Alarm DFS NBA live stream. 6-game slate tonight, 6 million chances to win. James and I have you covered. Jimmy Grant, what's going on, man?
Nothing much, man. 6-game slate, as you mentioned. It's gross, it's ugly, it's brutal, but we're ready to push through and break it all down for you guys.
It truly is ugly. We're going to go position by position and preview the DFS NBA playbook that James Grande wrote up before. But James, before we go and get into the point guards, we have to talk about some injury situations in Houston of all places, because we have Russell Westbrook, who's resting, so he's going to be out. James Harden, who is right now questionable, and Clint Capella, who is listed as doubtful. So we've got a lot up in the air, meaning a lot of value in Houston.
Yeah, there is a ton of value, and pretty much at every position we can break down. At point guard, we have Austin Rivers, who's coming off 30 minutes. Actually, a really good game. Has 3 straight games of 20 or more fantasy points. I think he's viable. I think the tournament pivot off of Rivers would be Chris Clemens, who we've seen in spurts. He's played a bunch of minutes without Harden and Westbrook this year. 34% usage rate, 1.28 fantasy points per minute, Fensty. Those are some big numbers out of Chris Clemens. We know he could fill it up quick, and if that game becomes a blowout, obviously he's going to get all the run he can handle. I mean, I think he gets a lot of run regardless of situation, just because lack of depth, to be honest. Chris Clemens, excellent tournament pivot. If you move down to shooting guard, Ben McLemore, huge price discrepancy from FanDuel to DraftKings. He's $2,200 more over on DraftKings, so I think we limit our exposure to FanDuel, but 3,600 rather is just too cheap over on FanDuel. I think that's a pretty good play. We know BMAC is going to take a ton of shots. We move down to small forward, Eric Gordon and Daniel House Jr., both viable. Daniel House Jr. actually mins salary on FanDuel, coming off a really good game, and a game I've always really liked using Daniel House in situations where there's no Russell Westbrook. I think he's always been able to grab more rebounds and showcase a little more. Now there's no Clint Capella, Russell Westbrook, or James Harden. So Daniel House should be a lock and load type of play for 35 minutes. And, if he's 3,500, if he gets us 25 fantasy points, that is a steal. At the same token, Eric Gordon, he's probably going to be the chalkiest play of the slate, if not the second or third chalkiest, because his teammates are all going to garner a lot of ownership. And then Isaiah Hartenstein, Fensty, 26 minutes in his last start, 17 points, 15 boards, 5 blocks. I mean, the guy can fill it up. Now, do the 5 blocks come against Rudy Gobert? I don't think so.
Probably
but the fact that he's min's salary over on DK and he's only $4,000 on FanDuel, I mean, it's a spot that we kind of have to plug and play regardless of scenario. So I think that's how we break down the Rockets.
Well, James, you're about to break them down a little bit more, because being that it's a 6-game slate and we can't ignore this Rockets squad, why don't we just put in categories which players we think will be the chalk tonight from this team? And you can tell me if you disagree. This is what I think it's going to be. I think Gordon, House, and Hartenstein are all going to be the chalk plays. The other players that you just mentioned, like Clemens and McLemore, and they're going to be the not chalk guys that you want for GPPs. Would you say that's you agree with that? And not only that you agree with that, but Austin Rivers, where does he fall into this picture?
I agree 100%, and I think Austin Rivers falls on the Chris Clemens side of that tree. I think Rivers kind of goes under the radar, because let's face it, Austin Rivers has never necessarily been a guy that you can plug in and you're like, wow, he's going to go for 40 tonight. That's not really Austin Rivers' MO. So I think he's going to go under-owned, and I agree on Hartenstein, Gordon, and House being the chalk.
Yeah, I'll say this too with Austin Rivers. I like, James, that he has a game under his belt that he played over 30 minutes already. So the minutes transition will not be there because he's already used to it. And that's why he made my starting 5 video. And also just how cheap he is, James, just doesn't need that much to hit value. Let's see this guy help out on the assist front. I think that's something he could do. All right, we just talked about the Rockets here. And again, a 6-game slate. So we have to cover these injuries a little bit more in depth. Now let's shift focus to the point guard position in general. Luka Doncic is up there. And as James has mentioned, and I'm sure we'll keep mentioning 100 times, you can play a drinking game to how many times that we'll mention that this slate is absolutely gross. But Luka Doncic is one of the masters in fantasy this year in general. James, I asked you this before. I'll ask you this again. You can't fade this guy tonight, can you?
You can't fade him on FanDuel where he's only 10-9. That price is too cheap. And we get 10,000. I always bring this up when a player is this significantly cheaper on FanDuel. You get $10,000 more to spend, and he's $1,000 cheaper on FanDuel than he is DraftKings. It's a price tag that we have to exploit. DraftKings, I'm perfectly fine with fading him because I think on DraftKings, we get a util spot. There are 2 centers that we'll get to, or 3 I'd throw in there that I think you can pair, and that obviously you're not going to be able to use Luka in that situation. So I say no fading on FanDuel, and I think the ownership projections speak to that. And then you can fade on DraftKings. Still an elite play, obviously. Luka Doncic, he could triple-double at the snap of a finger, fancy. So not fading on FanDuel, can fade on DraftKings.
All right, then let's move on to some other options here. De'Aaron Fox, we all know how bad Minnesota is at defending in general, but especially on that perimeter. Fox, at this point, especially with some of the mid and front court injuries that the Kings have faced, he's going to need to take on a little bit more offensively. No Marvin Bagley III, Dwayne Dedmon, in my opinion, is not going to be that helpful on offense. So when looking at the Kings, you've got a great spot for Fox, James.
Yeah, De'Aaron Fox is in a great spot, and I personally like limiting him to GPPs just because he's been a little volatile, like we saw in the middle of January where he went for 3 50-plus fantasy point games, and then he dipped down to like 20, 25. We can't afford sub-30 fantasy point outings at $8,000, so I think Fox is a great play. I'm just limiting it to tournaments. Since we're at the point guard position, Fancy, we just had some breaking news. Derrick Rose ruled out. So Derrick Rose.
Come on.
So now Derrick Rose is ruled out. Chris Paul, who was originally in the playbook, one of my favorite actually per dollar spends on the slate, already ruled out. So now we have 2 mid-tier plays. And I think this actually brings us back to Fox kind of full circle. I think the fact that Rose is out and I think the fact that Chris Paul is out is going to have a lot of ownership funneling towards De'Aaron Fox because they're all similarly placed. Fox was 7,700, Chris Paul was 7,500, Rose was 78 on FanDuel. I mean, all that ownership is going to go to De'Aaron Fox. It's going to go to Colin Sexton, who's on the next tier of guys. So, I mean, with Rose out, it's also
at this point. How don't you go Austin Rivers?
Well, I think ultimately, I mean, I want to hear a minutes limit on Reggie Jackson because Reggie Jackson is now the clear-cut guy. And, they told us that Reggie Jackson was only going to play 18 minutes in that second game back, Fensty. He then played 23 minutes. So without Rose, what is the extension? Like, what's the next move for Reggie Jackson? Because if Reggie Jackson's going to play 27 minutes, or let's say let's put him from somewhere from 26 to 28 at $4,500 against Cleveland, Darius Garland and Colin Sexton, that's who he's going to be going up against. I mean, that's a lock and load to me, especially considering the production he's shown since coming back. No Blake Griffin there, no Luke Kennard. The offense is going to be literally concentrated on Reggie Jackson and Andre Drummond. And we know Andre Drummond's not even an offensive guy. I mean, so realistically, if you break it down even further, the offense is running through Reggie Jackson. That is the offensive. That is where the ball is going to be all night, pick and roll. So with this Derrick Rose news, if we do get word that Reggie Jackson is going to be, could peak at 28 minutes, I'm kind of all in, and I'm going to be adjusting accordingly. But I think Reggie Jackson now becomes an elite value, and it's a slate where there was elite value. Seth Curry, if he starts again, who's going to go fly under the radar in GPPs, elite value. We talked about Chris Clemens, who might take 50 shots tonight if he does end up drawing a start. Derek White has been great for the Spurs lately, and it's weird because we don't ever like playing Spurs guards because of how rotationally unsound they are. Because
there's no consistency. It's They're throwing the guards at the wall, and whoever sticks for the night is the guy. However, Derek White has separated himself a little bit. You wonder why guys like Lonnie Walker IV can't get more minutes. That's because of the lack of consistency. Bryn Forbes, we've seen him go up and down in his games lately as well when it comes to his shooting. So Derek White has been starting to separate himself from the pack a little bit more. And seeing how cheap he is, especially with this kind of crap that we're now getting with injuries. By the way, I know I'm getting ahead of myself because it's shooting guards. I will say this. If Reggie Jackson, we're told, is only going to play 20 minutes, you have to fire in Bruce Brown because he's going to help with ball handling duties.
A million percent, because Bruce Brown is a really good peripheral stat guy, and he's super cheap across the industry, and Tony Snell ruled out. So, that frees up even more minutes for Bruce Brown. Maybe it's some minutes that we would see taken away because, let's face it, teams love playing Tony Snell for whatever reason. I mean, he's a good perimeter defender, so he will see time. But without him, I agree. I think Bruce Brown is, close to lock and load at 4,500. Unfortunately, I think we can shift over to shooting guard right now. Unfortunately, there are other lock and loads at the position, Fetsy, and it's someone that both you and I have him as the cover of my optimal lineups. You have him in your starting five, and that's DeMar DeRozan. How do you not, at least if you're looking at FanDuel, how do you not plug DeMar DeRozan into at least one of those spots?
You have to. The thing with DeMar DeRozan, he's not your typical shooting guard, though. I'm telling you guys, you have to remember, you have to think of those shutdown perimeter defenders that he faces, and you have to take it with a grain of salt because he's a mid-range player. He's going to set up at the elbow. He's going to look for a screen right at the elbow above the free throw line. He's either going to drive or he's going to shift over and take a jumper. He doesn't shoot a lot of threes. So, James, you and I were going back and forth about Chris Dunn before, who I truly respect. He's playing out of position, and he's doing a darn good job and better job defensively than anybody else on the Bulls right now, healthy or not. But still, now with DeMar DeRozan closer to the basket, Levine's not stopping him. Dunn's not going to stop him at the elbow either. Both will get screened out. And that's why I'm thinking DeMar DeRozan is not only set up for a big scoring night, James Grande, I'm thinking he's set up to grab a good amount of rebounds as well.
Yeah, there's triple-double upside for DeRozan, and we've seen him fall short. We've seen him fall short, barely short, 1 assist, 1 rebound, 4 straight games,
right? Just
last week and for the last 2 weeks. So I think there's legitimate triple-double upside with no LaMarcus Aldridge, as you mentioned, and right, whoever guards him, it doesn't matter, even if Chris Dunn is, a good on-ball defender. Chris Dunn will still get his steals because he does. He'll get his 2 or 3, and the Spurs will live with that because he's still going to give you 30, 10 and whatever. So I think DeMar DeRozan's a lock and load tonight, and I think you move on to the rest of the shooting guard position from there.
I'll also say this, James, and you can tell me if you disagree. I think you're going to be seeing a lot of Chris Dunn on Rudy Gay for this matchup. Being that Aldridge is out, I think Rudy Gay is going to be exclusively at the arc now, and you're going to be seeing a lot more of Levine on DeRozan, which means I think DeRozan is an incredible smash spot because of that.
I don't know. I think it's more of Boylan is going to follow in Brad Stevens' footsteps and put his best defender on the other team's best scorer. He's kind of been doing that. That's why Chris Dunn's been inserted in the starting lineup. He gets foul happy at times, and it ruins his playing time, and he gets taken off the floor. And obviously, that's not a guy that you want to foul because DeMar DeRozan is someone who attacks the basket quite often. I think he's going to guard DeMar DeRozan from start to finish as long as he's on the floor.
All right, now, what about Zach LaVine on the other side of that matchup? James, with the Bulls at this point, no Markkanen, no Carter, no Gafford. James, at this point, they're running out of options. It's comical.
Fancy, you're shitting on my Bulls right in front of my face.
All they have left is Thad Young. That's it. And Zach LaVine. At this point, I know it's so expensive. And if you're going to ask me between DeRozan and LaVine, who am I going with? I'm going DeRozan. I'm saving the money. But with Zach LaVine, how does he not take 500,000 shots in this matchup?
How does he not take 500,000 shots in every matchup? He's been too. Do I think the rebounds and the assists were kind of an anomaly last game? Yes, he's a decent peripheral stat guy. He is not that good. So that's going to come back down to earth. I think some of those rebounds go to Thad Young personally. I think a lot of those peripheral stats go elsewhere. But I think the 44 actual could happen on any given night. And we're seeing that. I mean, he scored 20 actual points in 15, 17, 30 straight games, whatever the actual number is right now. He's on fire. Obviously, like you said, we go to DeRozan, and I think there are some obvious pivots now with Chris Paul out in OKC and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Dennis Schroeder, both who are excellent price tags across the industry. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander let us all down on Saturday. Recency bias can be a good and a bad thing in DFS. For us tonight, it could be a great thing because, damn, I played him. He only gave us 27 fantasy points, and they click past his name. Well, I'll sign up for some Shai Gilgeous-Alexander sans Chris Paul. I mean, the guy has shown a 60-point upside in the last 2 weeks, 3 double-doubles, 4 and a triple-double. And then Dennis Schroeder, obviously, 30% usage rate, no Chris Paul is very hard to ignore. We mentioned Ben McLemore, and I think Bogdan Bogdanovic and Buddy Hield and Bruce Brown are all good plays, not priority.